The question I most commonly asked about climate change is should I be optimistic or pessimistic? I talk about this question a lot. My career has been at the intersection of climate science, technology, policy, and industry, mostly working for you. At one point, working for a US president, and now as chief scientist and chief carbon blanger at Carbon Direct. At the intersection, I think about that question in terms of energy flow and carbon statement option. So I ponder a variant of that question. How much energy should 10 billion people use? I was first prompted to think about this question by the late great Richard Smalley, nanotechnologist, Nobel Prize winning chemist, CEO discovered buckyballs, total mens. He gave an important and influential talk almost exactly 20 years ago, in which he laid out the top 10 challenges to humanity, like energy, water, food, poverty, the environment, and health. And then he said something kind of obvious. All of these energy are all of these are energy challenges. Water is the most straightforward. Three-quarters of the Earth's surface is covered with water. It's too salty to drink or use. The primary cause of desalination is energy. Food. I like food. 80% of the food consumed around the world move through modern agriculture. That means synthetic fertilizer combining that harvest, refrigeration, shipping, they are all energy. Climate. That's my day job. How do we go from 15.4 billion tons of greenhouse gases every year to less than zero very quickly? And so on. Abundant clean energy can make progress against this world list. So Richard estimated that he thought it would take for 10 billion people, 10 billion humans to live more or less like the United States. And his answer was 60 terawatts. Keep that number in your mind, 60. For reference, today the world uses about 26 terawatts of energy, about 8 terawatts of Tatar electricity. Now the urgency of climate means that we have to, for all of the energy we use today and all future energy really has to be abundant, sustainable, and cheap. Abundant, available where you want it, when you want it. Everybody should have energy, including the 3 billion people who use less electricity than my refrigerator use. However, it should also be sustainable. We can emit a lot of greenhouse gases. We can trust nature. Ideally, it's cheap, a lot cheaper than today. Maybe half or a third of what the US pays. That would be $20 a megawatt hour or a dollar of gigajoule. And remember, it's energy, not electricity. We also need heat for heavy industry. We need clean fuel, things like clean hydrogen or sustainable efficient fuels. Well, that seems hard, and it is. But if you know that's what you need or what you want, abundant, sustainable, cheap energy, we have a new question to ponder. How do we get 60 terawatts of that to 10 billion people? Well, the good news is every day the Earth receives 100 and 163,000 terawatt of energy from the sun. About half of that bounces back to space, but about 80,000 terawatts arrive at the Earth in a form we can use. For example, the air, land, and ocean convert some of that into 80 70 terawatts of wind. These are bigger number than 16, and we have got more than solar and wind. We have geothermal, we have hydro, we have nuclear. Then there's other kind of clean energy, and some of the best resources are in fact in the global south. These places are not simple future climate victim. These places are latent energy superpowers, and we have made some good starts. Let's look at Chile. Blessed with abundant hydro, solar, and wind, they can make green electrons on demand. A lot of those green electrons are going to get turned into hydrogen and ammonia, the key ingredient for fertilizer itself. a good fuel and a great way to move clean energy around the world. Now Chile has prioritized using this green electron and hydrogen to decarbonize its own grid and for domestic energy use. For things like mining, they are also building infrastructure. They are building out the grid and port for trade and commerce. This emphasis on infrastructure is the difference between a neo-colonial economy and a new economy built on abundance. Let's go to Kenya, home of the second most productive wine farm on earth in Lake Turkana, home of the second largest geothermal program on earth and future home of the Great Carbon Value, where this abundant, sustainable, cheap energy will create whole new industry and pull CO2 out of the sky. Now, those are good stars, but we have far to go. Hashtag we need more. Especially we need new investment vehicle, and we need development mechanisms that recognize the opportunity of abundance as opposite to being built on the scarcities of the past. My favorite example, Namibia, a young, rapidly growing nation full of promise, one of the very driest places on earth. Namibia has excellent solar and wind resources, in particular in the southwest. Unsurprisingly, a giant $10 billion project is bouldering along that will land 3,000 megawatts of solar on the ground, 3,000 megawatts of wind that will feed 3,000 megawatts of electrolyzer that will make clean hydrogen and ammonia for export to Europe. And European countries and European industries are providing the long-term offtakes. In addition, the port of Ruderis is getting an upgrade and there's going to be jobs and wealth creation in Namibia. All of these projects, what's not to like? Namibia gets wealth and jobs. Now Europe it cleans, secure energy supplies, still something off. That's it. This project is 10 times bigger than Namibia world grid, and these projects will not sustainably build out the infrastructure or energy access. No refrigerators, no new cores as a nation. Now again, this is a great project, but how can we do even better? Not just here, but everywhere. How do we harness abundant, sustainable, cheap energy for all? Well, there's three ingredients to that boil base. And if you plan to harvest abundance, you act differently in each. First out of the gate, infrastructure. We need transmission lines, roads, ports, railroads, fueling stations. We are not moving bits, we are moving molecules and electrons. We need this infrastructure to get electricity to the people of Namibia and to get clean fuels out of ports like Mombasa or Cartagena. This project take time, money, and people. We need to develop the human capital as part of this investment project for decades. Because remember, children for the rest of our life every week is infrastructure week. Louder. Second of the gap. Innovation we need for much more energy in many places. Much cheaper, that's an innovation agenda. Now you all are familiar with the profound and rapid decrease in costs associated with solar photovoltaics. That was a combination of sustained investment in innovation, plus market aligning policies, plus mass manufacturing. For solar, that was the United States, Germany, China, and others acting together. Well, if that's the recipe, we can do that again. We are already going it with electric vehicle and clean hydrogen production. We can certainly do it by turning electricity into fuels and pulling CO2 out of the sky. In fact, the CO2 and clean hydrogen will be the next generation of sustainable maritime and aviation fuels. We can go way further with solar, with perovskites, with multi-action technology like supermolecule. We can double or even triple the output. We just had fashion in California. Now that harness that abundance and now to harness that abundance, an objective should be cost reduction. Maybe 50, 50 or even 80% cost reduction. And those objectives should be part of the goal of the institution that run innovation. For example, the US Department of Energy EarthShot programs third investment. Specifically, we need to move away from single project finance to more systemic investment mechanism, one that reimagines risk across multiple projects, multiple investment cycles, and multiple years. Some of the goals of the audacious and overdue breakdown initiative. In addition, the full value chain should be part of the investment thesis. Revenues come from many sources, including the infrastructure itself, the equipment sales, the new product, and the improvement for health and welfare. Global positive investment, global positive growth that yields solid returns. Now, in the case of Chile, Japan is the key partner, and Japanese firms will make money on turbines, electrolyzer, ships, infrastructure, and debt. Now, one green hydrogen project is not enough money to do that. You you need you need to rebuild shipyards and supply chains. You need more than one project. So the Japanese government is backed dozens of projects, and these are anchored by bilateral agreement between Chile and Japan that includes long-term offtakes. Multiple projects and long-term offtakes change the value proposition for both countries. You are not feeding a set of shareholders, you are feeding two nations. And Chile has maintained its commitment to this now through three successive governments. So let's go back to Namibia. Here's the grid today. Instead of conventional project finance for one project, what would a $10 billion set of project look like? Well, for starters, you sure have to build out the grid a lot. You have to add solar and wind, maybe supersize some project, maybe add some hydropower instead of temporary construction jobs in Luderitz. You'd have a permanent construction industry there, and you'd be building the electrolyzer over Namibia that will anchor supply chains across sub-Saharan Africa, and you'd train a generation of workers that would be big enough for desalination, bringing fresh water to the desert and the communities and to the new industries. Big enough for hospitals, universities, regional logistic hubs, big enough to encourage good governance, and best of all, low cost clean fertilizer that could be used to make food in Namibia, South there, and to its neighbor. In effect, Namibia could be a global anchor for food and fuel, and the investor will get a solid return. Now that's a future to be optimistic about. Because let's be honest, whether I'm optimist or not, the work looks the same. So let's reimagine that first question. It doesn't matter whether I'm optimist or you are optimist. It matters if we are optimistic. Collective action, building together, is what makes the difficult possible and nourishes the soul through a mission and purpose. And we have a lot to be optimistic about. Infrastructure, innovation, and investment are commitments to the future anchored in optimism. We also have the tools and tactics we need. We know that what to do, and we can act not out of anger or fear, but out of generosity and common purpose, bringing aspiration and humanity together. We are going to build a thriving, vibrant, exciting world full of generosity and full of potential that going to build. Okay guys, thank you.